As part of our series of pre-election interviews, we turn to a candidate for a city councilor at large, a Dorchester native. She has experience as a social worker and advocate. We'd like to welcome Carla B. Monteiro. Thank you very much for being with us, Carla.
Hi, Chris. Thank you so much for having me today. And thank you for the tremendous work that BNN does for our community.
Carla, I know you're a candidate and a professional, but you also have a life story. I want to go back when you were a student who was struggling at Madison Park High. It didn't look good, and you turned out quite differently from that. What happened?
Thank you. I think, so I did struggle academically at Madison Park High and eventually went to City Roots program, a program offered by the city of Boston, and graduated from there. And years later, was on welfare. I had my son at the age of 20 and was part of a program called Jewish Vocational Services. And Jewish Vocational Services is where I was able to train and have access to, training for Microsoft Office and also medical billing and coding, which opened the doors for me to obtain a job at Verizon Wireless. And returned to college 14 years later and obtained my associate's, bachelor's, and then master's.
Well, you have become a social worker, and I think a lot of that is focused on people who had substance use disorder, helping them get their lives back together. What have you learned from that?
I learned that there are a lot of challenges and there are a lot of barriers to care for people who are experiencing substance use disorder. Oftentimes, transportation is an issue. A lot of times they don't have access to funding, to purchase, driver's licenses or IDs. And so those are things that are required to pick up your medication at pharmacies. And so if they don't have that, then they don't have access to medication. Also, people who are experiencing substance use are also most often than not experiencing homelessness as well. And so it's hard for people to think about sobriety and to focus on sobriety when they don't know where they're going to sleep at night. And so there are a lot of resources that there's a lot of gaps in services that I think we need to address in order to support people who are in this position.
Well, I know that it would be too much to ask someone to come up with a silver bullet for all the problems brought together at Mass Avenue and Cass Boulevard, but at least how does your background help the city deal with that in a better way?
I think because of my daily, I know the daily struggles that people are facing. And as I named, transportation as one of them, and also housing. And so when we're thinking about some of the resources the gaps that are in the gaps in services, we have to figure out how to address all of these things. We have to address the basic needs first before we can tackle these other things. Substance use is a very isolating disease. And so if people don't have, family to support them, or any resources that can help them move forward, then it's going to be really challenging to help people in their recovery.
I also want to ask you how you went from what you were doing in social work and advocacy to deciding to be a candidate. What opened your eyes to that possibility?
Running for office is social work. It's a macro form of social work. And so I think a lot of it is, my campaign is rooted in my own experiences. And, because my story is so similar to so many Bostonians and remains a reality to so many people today. And so, in my experiences, the gaps that I experienced back then are still a lot of the same gaps that we still see to this day. And so I think because of my own lived experience and it's informed by my work as a social worker, these are the reasons why I've decided to run, because I want to build those gaps, and I want to fill those gaps for people in our community.
I also want to ask you about your feelings about housing. And before we get into policy, what struck me was when you bought a home, it wasn't just a financial decision, it was a real life-changing event. What did it do for you?
So, purchasing a house allowed us to secure housing for not only myself, but for my family as well. I can't imagine where we would be if I didn't purchase the house. It was, I spent long periods of time, living on the brinks of homelessness and experiencing, my family, we've moved often, we've experienced eviction. And so, that was a sense of security for my family, but it also allowed me to go back to school, because I did have rental income, and that was able to be part of my supplemental income. I was able to go back to school and obtain my degrees as well. And I think there's just nothing like having sense of security of having your own home. And I think for us, we have to focus on, helping people with their goals in our community, whether that means renting or owning a home, whatever their goals are, we need to figure out how we can support people.
I know that can be a long-term project, but on the other hand, right now, we have many people in Boston who are in crisis, renters who are in fear of eviction, and some homeowners worried about losing their homes.
Yeah, there are. And, we need to reevaluate the way that we define what is affordable in Boston. We have to create more, we must mandate and expand the rights of renters and protecting renters, and also right to counsel. There's, and when we're thinking about continuing to build and develop, housing in Boston, we want to make sure that it meets the demands of the market, and also make sure that it's sustainable, and so that we're investing in energy efficient buildings. But so, I have clients who, are either, there are city programs that may be available, but if they don't have the money or can't prove that they can sustain the rent, then they're not qualified for those programs. So we need to figure out, again, there's a lot of things that we need to fix, but we need to figure out a better plan in filling those gaps, and how can we support people so that, if they are qualified for some programs, how can we help them sustain the rent and sustain housing?
I know because you're a Madison Park alum, I want to ask you about what needs to be done for the schools. And there are some schools that have been great for a long time. Some others have turned around and become great. Madison Park continues to struggle. What about the schools that continue to struggle?
I think with the school system, we need to listen more to, we need to listen more to teachers, the educators, also thinking about connecting with parents and students and learning more about what they need. I think oftentimes we're not including educators in these conversations, and they're the ones who are working with the children daily. I think we also need to hire more social workers within the schools to support students who are trying to navigate different issues that they're going through in their lives. Kids go through, kids are living in poverty. They may be living in a house with domestic violence, or they may just have a bad day. Something may happen on the way to school, and so we really need to address a lot of the mental health and things like that may affect students and may affect them, their grades and things like that. And I actually went to Madison Park, but graduated from City Roots because I was struggling academically and did not graduate from Madison Park High School.
And it sounds to me too, when you mention City Roots, is if what students need is a lot more focused attention in order to succeed.
Exactly. Yeah. And City Roots was a much smaller, it was one classroom, smaller classroom. And so it was a lot more helpful for me to focus, especially Madison was a very large school, had a lot of friends. And so I was, kind of socializing a little bit more than I needed to, and also needed more supports. And I don't think that I got the guidance and support that I needed at that time. And so I think if we are focusing the ratio and decreasing the class sizes so that students are able to have more attention from their teachers, that would be more supportive for students, so that we can recognize what somebody is going through on a daily basis.
I want to ask you about accountability and police reform. There are some reforms that have been adopted. Some of them are starting to take effect, but there have also been some signs of resistance to that from the department as well. What would you like to see as a counselor?
Yeah, so I would like to see some sort of a collaborative approach. As a social worker, I think that it's, we need wraparound services all around. And I think that also includes us fostering and building better relationships with everyone in the community. I do think that we need to, reallocate funds for more mental health and more of a city-run crisis support system. But I think that, we do need to work together and foster a lot of these relationships.
Well, we thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Candidate for Boston City Council at Large, Carla B. Monteiro.